Well, good morning, everybody. This is Truth Seeker here, and this week saw the end of the Bible Students General Convention. I know this is the convention season for Jehovah's Witnesses, and they put on 3 days of convention. It's been a tradition for Bible students to hold an annual convention every summer that they call the General Convention. And this convention is something that is a tradition that's been ongoing since since the late 1920s, when the Bible students became more or less separated from the Watchtower. That many Bible students had left the Watchtower Society dissatisfied with the changes in the general tenor of the leadership under Judge Rutherford. His changing of doctrines, changing the focus of the movement. Many Bible students did hang in with the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Watchtower Society until the mid and late 1930s. My family, I learned recently, or deduced recently, were associated with the Jehovah's Witnesses for probably about 5 years. After the formation of the Jehovah's Witnesses, or the change in name of those associated with Watchtower. That was a pretty interesting transition. I think it's easy to deduce that Russell had a change in mind, in direction. I think that he realized that he was a sick man, that he wasn't going to be alive much longer, or at least suspected that he was not a well man and would be around very long to see the society continue. A.H. Macmillan indicated in his book, or implied in his book, Faith on the March, published 1957, really a first history of the Bible Students movement, published separately from the Watchtower, although Macmillan was intimately associated with the Watchtower, was one of the directors, and was given permission to go through their records and archives to help him research the material he needed for his book. But he mentioned that shortly before Russell's death, he had a very protracted discussion with Russell. Russell actually, according to Macmillan, wanted him to step in the role of president, and he didn't feel he was really ready at that point to take on that position, at least according to himself. Maybe he just didn't want it. But he supported Rutherford as well as Van Amberg, and even though Bible students have their version of the history, I suspect that Macmillan wasn't probably too far off from the truth. It's certainly evident that Russell's will was outdated. When you go and you check his last will and testament, it was put together at the suggestion of Rutherford. Russell had worked with Rutherford on putting together this last will and testament in 1907, which was only 9 years before Russell passed away. It may have been modified subsequent to 1907, but Certainly, it was outdated. It named, for instance, individuals like John Edgar to be part of the editorial committee who had passed away some 4 years before Russell passed away. So it wasn't an up-to-date last will and testament. And I don't think Russell really necessarily cared about the details of such a thing. I think he figured that things would work out the way he wanted to see things go anyway. And I think that was the intent of the discussion that he had with Macmillan. But anyway, as a result of Rutherford's assuming the presidency, there was a transition or a change in the direction of the movement. And I think Russell wanted to, and this is my own opinion from my own research and understanding of the movement from a personal perspective, having been a member of the Bible students, hearing two sides of the story. I suspected that Russell realized that there had to be a change or a shift in some way in order to grow the movement. I think he saw that the Watchtower had potential for growth, and that some sort of change had to take place. And I think in a way, Macmillan and Rutherford and Van Amberg and those that worked in cooperation with those leaders were working towards making that idea or vision of Russell's an achievement. You couldn't grow, and I think Russell knew this, you couldn't grow the organization when the only focus of the Bible students was for the high calling. Each and every member of the Bible students movement believes that they are part of the 144,000, that when they baptize and consecrate their lives, they're consecrating themselves to be a part of that 144,000. And that is the belief today. And that's not what Jehovah's Witnesses believe. They believe that those that are coming into association with the Watchtower and becoming baptized and in essence consecrating themselves to the work of the society. Their hope is for earthly perfection and earthly resurrection on the human plane, and that shift in focus and that shift in doctrine allowed the Watchtower to continue to grow to a sizable movement, which we see has come to fruition. In fact, Macmillan, in his book, by that time in 1957, I believe it was when it was published, he said that the society was well on its way to accomplishing that vision that Russell had initially relayed to him in that private discussion that he had. So I find it interesting to see the changes that took place from a historical perspective, and how Rutherford made it uncomfortable for supporters of Russell to remain associated with Watchtower. And that even so, there were many that were dedicated to Russell, so dedicated to the Watchtower that they waited as long as the 1930s before they left and joined a burgeoning resurgence in the Bible students outside and separate from the Watchtower. And this tradition of the General Convention began in spirit, I guess, in 1929, when the Bible students had their first reunion convention. There were some, I believe, 300 in attendance at that meeting, at that convention in Pittsburgh or Allegheny, at the original Bible house where the Watchtower began. And from that point on, there was the Great Depression, which kind of slowed the activities down because people just didn't have money. But by the late 1930s, the country was beginning to emerge from the Depression, and the Dawn Bible Students, which had begun its operation in 1932, could afford to begin broadcasting their frank and earnest message, which really had the impact upon Jehovah's Witnesses that were not satisfied with the old-time Jehovah's Witnesses that were not happy with the changes in the society but didn't know where else to go. So it drew in a lot of the original Bible students. By 1950 or 1946, there's a court transcript regarding a tax case between the Dawn and the town of East Rutherford, a dispute. And in that court transcript, it was indicated that the Bible Students movement, subsequent to the 1920s and 30s, was some 56,000 worldwide, which accounts for, or is consistent with, the number of Bible students just around 1927, 28, before there was a major split from the Watchtower. During the middle to late 1920s, because of this idea that was being promulgated by the Watchtower Society, that the kingdom would be established in 1925, membership grew to about 80,000 and 80 to 90,000, and the majority of those who left were regathered into the Bible Students movement of one form or another. There were several different sects or branches that came out of the society, independent of the society. You had the Pastoral Bible Institute, you had the Layman's Home Missionary under P.S.L. Johnson, and I guess the PBI was Streeter. And then Norman Woodworth really spearheaded the work of the Dawn Bible Students in the early 1930s. And it was Woodworth that gave testimony in 1946 to the size of the movement at that time. It's interesting that memorial figures indicated that by 1928 or 29, the memorial attendance dropped from about 90,000 in 1927 to 17,000. A substantial drop. I mean, a huge drop, a more than 80% drop in the memorial attendance. for Watchtower by before 1930, actually, and the idea that, or the number of 56,000 in the 1940s is consistent with a larger part of those that left the society in the 20s had by that point joined independent Bible students movement. And so the original movement associated with Russell really separated out during the 20s and 1930s. My family, I found, didn't join the Bible students until the 1930s. According to my research, my grandparents may have continued with association with the society as late as 1937. They would never admit that they had ever been Jehovah's Witnesses, but it seems from very distinct statements and memories that I had growing up that the final straw with the doctrinal changes for my grandfather was when there was a Watchtower publication stating that Adam and Eve were not eligible for a resurrection in the kingdom, and to him that was too much for him to accept, and he broke away from the society over that point. And I found that that doctrinal change wasn't published until August 15th, 1937, which is 6 years after the Jehovah's Witnesses actually began. Albeit members, there were still, I guess, areas of the world where those that were associated with Watchtower were still called Bible students, notably Germany during the 1930s and 40s, where Jehovah's Witnesses were persecuted. They still referred to them as the Bible students. So it wasn't a wholesale, complete shift when the name was a Jehovah's Witness was adopted. But general conventions actually peaked after World War II. Some of the early Bible student conventions, before I was even born, in the early 1950s, had attendance a little over 1,000. And one of the traditions for Bible students conventions, going all the way back to Russell, were convention photographs. So all the attendees would get together and would set up for a convention photograph. And I've been using the photographs in recent years to kind of guesstimate the attendance. In fact, actually, if you go to the Watchtower headquarters, they have a little museum there. One wall is an entire mural of an early Bible student convention with Charles Russell and Macmillan and Rutherford. They were all in attendance at this convention. I believe it might have been in the 1890s. This blown up mural on a whole wall of an early Bible students convention. There were probably several hundred members in attendance at this particular convention when this photograph was, what this photograph depicts. So this has been a Bible student tradition year after year, and Bible students general conventions during the 1960s that I can recall. My earliest convention was when I was a baby. I don't remember it, but there were a number of years where my parents couldn't afford to attend the Bible Students Convention, and aside from attending as a baby, literally, I think I was 5-6 months old when my first General Convention in 1955 or 6. The first convention that we actually attended and regularly from that point after was 1965. I was 10 years old, and the convention attendance at that time was enough to allow a venue for as large as Indiana University. They have a large auditorium there that could accommodate over 1,000 individuals, and there were enough Bible students that would attend that convention to warrant renting a venue of that size. I think the estimates were in the area of around 1,000 or so in attendance at at that convention for that decade. Of course, there were splits after 1965. There was a split over whether or not the kingdom had been established in 1914. The Dawn had published a controversial book that suggested that the kingdom had not started in 1914, whereas the more conservative Bible students accepted Russell's idea that the kingdom had begun, and they called it there was his heavenly reign and mediatorial reign, and so they separated the 1,000-year kingdom into different aspects. It gets confusing. If you ever looked at one of the chart of the ages, you'll see that these dispensations that the Bible students, it's a dispensational group, became more and more complex, and there were a lot of crossovers that you had to. They made it it was pseudo-intellectual to be able to make it as complex as possible, satisfied or suited, bloating the ego that you were truly an intellectual by understanding Russell's teachings. But I noticed in joining the convention this year, which was virtual, because since COVID started, the General Convention is no longer, they haven't had a physical convention since 2019. The 2021 convention was entirely on Zoom, and I noticed that attendance was in the 350 range, and that is interesting because you would think that being a virtual convention, you would have more viewers, more in attendance than 350, because it's so much more convenient. It's free to join in from the luxury of your own home. You don't have to take a week off. You don't have to spend money. You don't have to travel. So it seems that there's a decline in either in interest or in the actual numbers of Bible students attending, and it is an aging movement. In fact, there was some discussion, a symposium held on the ecclesia arrangement at the end end of the age, dealing with the topics of an aging membership, and aging and I guess diminishing numbers. So there were really, I listened to that particular discourse, and there wasn't, or symposium, there wasn't really anything of any revelation or anything interesting, such as now women can be elders. It will make special dispensation because there aren't as many men, and there wasn't anything like that. Bible students are a very conservative organization. They're a throwback to the 19th century, and very archaic in their values and their culture. There were a couple of points. I didn't listen to too many talks, but I did kind of browse through a few. And in past videos I've made comparisons between Jehovah's Witnesses and the Bible students. The culture of the Bible students, it makes sense too that there isn't a tremendous difference between Jehovah's Witnesses and Bible students. The one derived from the other. The Jehovah's Witnesses originated from the Bible students, especially at a point in time when the Bible students' culture was well established. There was its own language, terminology. There was its own leader that everybody referred to, and many revered. They called Russell the wise and faithful servant, or the Laodicean messenger. He certainly was the acknowledged head of the movement for 40 years or so, and to many from that point thereafter. It was still Russell's organization, Watchtower, and so you had that element. You had the culture of all or nothing. Once you were consecrated, you symbolized your consecration through baptism. Your life wasn't your own at that point. You had to meet certain behavioral expectations, and there were certain activities that you needed to at least outwardly perform in order to be accepted as a Bible student. Certain behaviors, certain characteristics, and some of them were not healthy, especially in a mental health, from a mental health perspective. And I just kind of browsed through a couple of talks to see if there have been any changes, if time has altered the culture in any sense, and I think what you hear from the platform, and the fact that women aren't teachers, is a strong indicator that the culture itself is well established, entrenched, that it hasn't changed any, that it's not about to change. It's still very much rooted in its 19th century culture. And in fact, back in those days, sisters, I guess in some ecclesias or congregations, as Jehovah's Witnesses now understand or call them congregations, Bible students called them ecclesias or classes. But anyway, there were certain classes where sisters weren't really permitted to speak or comment during the study meetings. And the the culture is very very misogynistic and very male dominated, and still is today. So that I didn't see any changes from. In fact, I see even a stiffening, a more rigidity in holding on to these archaic values and this culture. Most of the talks were about behavior. I picked a few talks to listen to, part ways, just picking things out here and there, just a sort of a sampling, a statistical sampling of what most or the majority of the talks dealt with, and they deal with behavioral aspects of expectations of members. And you had talks such as, what manner of persons will you be? Another talk was, be ye transformed. Another one was a talk on the Ark of the Covenant, but it gave, there was advice given on child rearing. And I find it ironic that the individual whom I'm familiar with, or with whom I am familiar, they haven't children of their own, that they have the gumption, or let's say audacity, to give advice on child rearing to young parents. I find it a bit presumptuous that the ones that were most outspoken about child rearing and children's behavior are usually the ones that never had children. But one in particular that I found interesting was, what manner of persons are you to be? And there were several specific topics of behavior, of character, that were addressed, and one of them was entitled "The Spirit of Atheism," and that drew my attention because in this talk there was a characterization of atheists that I thought was completely, actually I found it repugnant, because certainly I think this characterization is 100% wrong, and in fact I think you couldn't be as far off on who and what atheists are like than this particular characterization. And I listen a lot to the channel The Atheist Experience, where you have in these callers, they call in, and Matt Dillahunty is the one of the premier hosts of the show, and he's confronted by individuals who believe that they have a means of proving God's existence, and in the way Dillahunty describes atheism is that it's not a positive assertion, and that's certainly the situation. The assertion is, and the claim is by Christians, that God exists. And so by making this positive assertion, it's incumbent upon the Christian who makes the claim that God exists to provide the evidence that this is so. And it's not incumbent to an atheist to prove that there's a lack of evidence sufficient to satisfy the individual that God indeed exists. You can't, he makes these analogies, and I think they're valid, where he brings it to the absurd, because many Christians say that you need to prove God's non-existence. The default in the Christian's mind is that God exists and that you have to prove He doesn't. Well, that's absurd. The claim is that God exists and He is the explanation for everything that we see around us, all of creation. And if you make that kind of a claim, you need to, like any other proposition, provide the evidence that supports that proposition. And that's just logical thinking, very fundamental logical thinking. But this characterization of atheism went well beyond anything of that nature. It didn't even address the evidence that there was evidence that God existed. Instead, it was really ad hominem, characterization or attack on the character of atheists. And there were a couple of statements made in this talk that I took issue with, and one of them is that they claim that atheism is a relatively new concept that arose since the French Revolution. I don't know if it is or isn't. I believe that there may have been atheists throughout human existence, but we do know in the 20th century, in the 19th and 20th centuries, the idea and the concept that there is no God did exist among certain philosophers, and has actually grown over the years as science has dispelled many of the notions that were promulgated by religion about the natural world. And I think that's where the most harm to such documents as the Bible and any other spiritual writing that or belief that holds to some creation myth has been affected, because science has given us a realistic, a much more clear understanding of how nature works and how the universe came to be. And it doesn't require a God to exist to have this, to hold on to these understandings. I mean, creation isn't dependent necessarily on the existence of a God. But this didn't deal with that. Some of the statements here were that atheists are amoral, that they have no morals, that the only way in which individuals have morality is through Christianity. And that is a very awful belief or characterization of atheists, because I think, in a sense, they're more moral than Christians, certainly more moral than Bible students. I find many Bible students with the idea that they are exclusively the ones that have been called out by God to be part of the 144,000. And if you read any of Russell's works, this divine nature that is what the 144,000 assume. When you consecrate your life and you die, you are resurrected, according to Bible student belief, to the same plane of existence as God himself. They call it the divine nature. And what higher? There's nothing higher in a plane of existence than God himself. So they're essentially in believing that they will become gods themselves, and that's pretty presumptuous. And holding on to this idea that they will be these all-powerful, all-knowing creatures at some point leads to a certain type of pride, a pride in their humility, and a smugness, and that resonates through this self-righteousness that they assume by holding on to the value systems and adopting this value system, at least outwardly. When I see and experience that it has created actually a culture of dishonesty, because there is nobody who can meet these expectations. Humans are not perfect, and humans are the expectations to make it and to qualify for the 144,000 are so unrealistic and so unattainable. They run against human nature to the point where there's no way that anybody can meet these expectations. So people are forced into a state of dishonesty and a state of guilt, because you realize that God, who sees all things, knows your imperfections, and so it's shaming you into your behavior to follow this set of unattainable behavioral traits. For example, as a child transitioning into adulthood, early teens, we had meetings that talked about such things as self-abuse or masturbation, and that it was sinful. And this is such a primal part of being a human being that there's no way anybody can abstain. If you do, you're going to be really psychologically damaged. And it damages you anyway, because you know that God sees you and you're doing it secretly, and therefore you're forced by this belief and culture that you've done something wrong and you've got to hide it. It forces you into dishonesty and a sense of shame and guilt. And the idea that atheists are amoral is such an ironic twist, because they force you into a false dishonesty that makes you guilty of a sin that isn't a sin, and to hide your behavior so that others don't disapprove of you. And so it's a real contradiction, and it forces individuals to really be dishonest, especially about things that really aren't a moral issue at all. Homosexuality is another one. because the Bible identifies it as sin, they've taken it to another step, and anybody who's homosexual is got to keep it really quiet, or else they run the likelihood of being disfellowshipped, formally humiliated, using a class trial, and then inevitably resulting in your disfellowshipping out of the class, because they do not accept homosexuality. And I've known this to have happened, and it's a terrible thing, terrible thing for people to do to one another. So who's really the moral one? And he's saying that atheists are innately immoral. Well, actually, I think it can be pretty well understood that religion is sort of a parasite. It latched itself onto innate human morality. I mean, morality is something, what we call morality, is something that is an innate characteristic of beyond humans. There's altruism among chimpanzees. There's a documentary that where this little baby became an orphan chimp, Oscar, and the alpha male of the tribe, chimpanzee tribe, adopted him. And now there was no reason for that to happen, except there was an altruism and a feeling of empathy within that alpha male that was just inherent, that was there, part of his nature, to adopt this little guy and to make sure that he was safe and could grow up. And certainly nobody was going to mess with the alpha male. So altruism and moral aspects are demonstrated in the animal kingdom over and over again. We've seen it here on our lake, where we've seen some very interesting behavior in birds, and the geese were attacking ducks, and for no reason the swans physically separated the geese from the ducks, and they prevented this conflict and intervened so that there wasn't any violence and harm brought upon one group by another. Why? There's nothing to explain that, except there was some built-in sense of a moral sense that they were preventing some kind of an act that wasn't beneficial to either group. It was really quite bizarre. And you see that over and over again in the animal kingdom. They say those that are cetacean experts on cetaceans, whales and dolphins, that the section of their brain that deals with empathy by relative proportion, in their brain, is much greater than that of a human, and that's why they live in such a very strongly knit social arrangement within the pod. And I've seen documentaries regarding baby killer whales that have been separated from their pod, and how they yearned so much for interaction that they formed, that it formed a relationship with humans who were kind of filling in a void or a gap in this baby's need for being touched and attended to. And there are other examples of this throughout nature, and this is part of who we are. We're part of this world. We came up through the ranks of the creatures that came before us, and so many of these things have developed in us, and because we've developed into a much more complex creature, many of these aspects have been amplified within us to allow us to cooperate and to work with one another. In fact, actually, there's a very fascinating documentary about Ed Wilson. Please look at it. Ed Wilson. It's called Of Ants and Men. And humans belong to 19 species that have become super social creatures, not just social creatures like chimps, but well beyond that. And ants and termites, of the 19 different species that have transitioned into this condition, what they've called eusocial, humans are the only mammal, in fact, or I think every other example of eusocial behavior are found in the insect world. And so I highly recommend that documentary, Of Ants and Men, about Ed Wilson's life. And you'll like the man. He's a wonderful man. He's an evolutionist. I don't know if he's an atheist, but it doesn't matter. He's a scientist, and many of his ideas were highly controversial, and now today they're accepted concepts. So I recommend that. And to say that we're just inherently immoral because we don't believe that the Bible is a document that was given to us by a higher supernatural power makes us immoral. And he went on to characterize this, that the ends justifies the means, that there's no right or wrong without God, and that atheists are guiltless. You have no guilty conscience, as if a guilty conscience is necessary in order to be a proper Christian. And he's right, because Christianity, especially the Bible students and the Jehovah's Witnesses, emphasize and exaggerate the depth of the fall and its impact on humans, and how deeply in need of fixing and repairing humans are, and that it's a sin or a crime to question the existence of God is an unforgivable sin. And he went on to characterize atheists as they accuse their opponent before that your opponent accuses you. So they go on the offense, and they're stealers, and they're liars and haters. Like I said, it was all ad hominem attack. And he was counseling everybody to have no part with atheism. And he went on to say, why are atheist activists so unhappy? And I don't know who he had in mind in particular from an atheist activism point of view. I know I've had discussions with my cousin who's from the very same congregation or ecclesia, or close to it, actually physically, to this individual's ecclesia. They're both in Southern California. And so they may have communicated my discussions with my cousin. Why are the activists so unhappy? And I don't know where he gets that from, because most of the atheist activists that I'm familiar with haven't been happier in their life, and it's not a hedonistic happiness. I don't think of myself as a hedon. I don't even like black leather. But anyway, I think that's a terrible way of characterizing atheists. And he referred to and accused atheists of following subtle science. And I, now, having had a great deal of the majority of my education has been science-based, I didn't really follow this idea. I've never heard of the term subtle science, and I Googled it, and I found that referred to in the, what's her name, J.K. Rowling, who wrote the Harry Potter series, subtle science and the arts of potions or something like that. And it was the only reference that I really could find on this term. And I know this individual who gave this talk. He has children that were my kids' age. In fact, my oldest daughter was friends with his son, and they both grew up in the Harry Potter era, and I guess he blames Harry Potter for I guess whatever happened with his children. You know, parents always or often don't want to take on the responsibility for what they find unacceptable in their children. They got to find another reason for it, and I think that's what really happened in this, if that's the case. Other aspects, like I said, the Bible students are wholly focused on one thing, and that's to be part of the 144,000. They never lost that goal. That's the one and only reason for the call. And that once that work is done, then the kingdom will begin. God will bring down this present evil social order and establish His rule, 1,000-year rule, with the Christ, with God, Jesus as King, and the church, or 144,000, as co-rulers who sit in judgment of the world. And it gets the idea from Revelation 20, where it says that the souls of them that were slain for the word, or something like that, they sit in judgment, and they ruled with Christ for 1,000 years. And so that's the role of the 144,000, the members of the church, is to rule in the kingdom as kings and priests. And it's all found in Revelation. And so that's the key thing. And if you renege, let's say, if you ever had second thoughts about the whole business, and again, like Jehovah's Witnesses are noted for pushing their children to become committed and chained to the society, to the Watchtower, and to Jehovah's Witnesses through baptism. And and they try to encourage baptism as early as possible. And it's not uncommon for 10, 12, 13, 14-year-olds to baptize and then become chained to the society. And if you're not, if you grow up and have second thoughts, you're subject to shunning. And in the Bible students' world, you're subject to second death because your consecration and your baptism symbolizes the baptism symbolizes your consecration. Your consecration is a dedication of your life to becoming one of the 144,000. And in order to do so, you must sacrifice your life. And in order to sacrifice your life, you have to have the ransom price of Jesus' blood applied to you, the ransom sacrifice that qualifies you for a resurrection. You sacrifice that to God in order to have this opportunity to be part of the 144,000. So, if you have second thoughts and leave the movement, you are in jeopardy of second death, which is the non-existence. You're not entitled to a resurrection. You've given up that chance, and if you've given up on your consecration, you've blown your chances for a resurrection. Although there's the Russell created and also ran provision he called the Great Company for those individuals that had given up their resurrection rights to the human plane, but didn't qualify for the 144,000, but who weren't really evil. I mean, he created this quandary for himself, so he had to put these people who weren't evil, but who also didn't make the mark for their consecration. He had to do something, and because they didn't warrant the worst punishment, certainly. So he created this Great Company idea. Well, that's what Rutherford used. He changed what the Great Company was, and said it's the Great Company, or the Great Multitude, were those that were coming into association with the Watchtower and were eligible for everlasting life on earth. And this way, then he was able to expand the ability for growth in the Watchtower's ranks to an indefinite number, essentially, by making this doctrinal shift. And but to Bible students, one who gives up their consecration, either if they're not evil enough, they become one of the Great Company, and the Great Company is sort of somewhere like an angel, I guess. It's not a human existence, but it's not divine, all-powerful existence either. It's something like an angel. So there's no real reason to believe in this thing, but Russell had to make an accommodation. But for those that the emphasis is that if you've consecrated yourself and you've been baptized, you really are in jeopardy of second death, because you've made the assessment, you're counting the cost, and you really are taking a chance putting yourself in jeopardy of second death. Now, this second death, in essence, is analogous to hell without torment, and many Christian sects have lost the concept of eternal torment. That hell really is a separation from God, and more of a psychological torture by not being a let's say, accepted of God, and so they don't believe in a physical place of eternal torment. Some sects hold on to that, but many have a more compassionate idea of hell, and but they still use hell as an incentive to commit and to stay committed to the culture and the expectations of whatever sect or religion you belong to. And the same is true in the Bible students. And I just picked a couple of statements out of several talks that show that this guilting, this shaming tool psychologically is still used. For example, there was a talk that discussed the opportunity. It was going through Revelation and talking about the Church of Laodicea and the 7 churches in Revelation 2. And Laodicea is the last church, and they believe that we're in the last age, part of the age before the kingdom starts. And it says something about being hot or cold, and I wish that thou were hot or cold, but because you're lukewarm, I spew thee out of my mouth. And he elaborates on what these things mean. And it's a little self-conflicting and confusing, because they talk about nominal Christians that have to make an assessment to count the cost, whether or not they really should be part of the church or not. But you can't count the cost if you're not begotten of the Spirit, and they're not begotten of the Spirit. So you got this self-conflicting. They're sort of a confusion of ideas, semi-grasping ideas that they have that they can't enunciate clearly. But the thing is that they say once you consecrate, and this individual indicated that once you consecrate, you can't, he used this analogy, you can't stop the hand to the plow. You can't turn back. There's no option to turn back. And he quoted, remember Lot's wife. And Lot's wife, if you recall the story, the burning and destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, turned back to look on Sodom, and she was turned to a pillar of stone. So there's this punishment. God killed her, and so that's the prospect. This prospect of the second death, and those that retract from their faith, original faith. This is what is waiting for them, and this is always on the mind of those that are in the Bible students, because you can never live up to these outrageous expectations, this sense of the purity, false sense of purity, that standards of purity that are set before them. Nobody can attain to these outrageous ideals that they set forward and meet them. So you always have this Damocles sword of uncertainty, whether or not you're going to make it or not, or whether or not you'll end up in second death. And so in that sense, it's used as a prodding tool. You have the carrot, which is eternal glory as the highest being in the universe, and the stick, which is you will go into everlasting destruction if you recant your belief. And again, this was reiterated on another couple of talks, just to give you an idea. There was one that was, about be transformed was the name of the talk. And it again talked about that we were born with worldly ambitions, so we must transform against these things and metamorph like a caterpillar into a new creature, and only then are we acceptable to God. And he says, if you understand any of this, then you're culpable, because your eyes are open, and the calling applies to you if you have any degree of understanding of this. And he says your calling is irrevocable. And they didn't say directly, but what he means by irrevocable is that your prospect is that you won't qualify for the 144,000, and you've given up your life rights as a human. So there are only two avenues, and that is either second death, or if you're lucky, you become part of the great company. And again, it's this carrot and stick idea, but they use it in such a way as to guilt trip and to shame members into their molding them into a character shape and a set of beliefs that are their expectations. And so it's not a very healthy set of circumstances. Using that methodology to conform to the culture. There was another individual that talked about children. And I suspect that I don't recall this individual ever having children, but it's interesting. I find that the elders that are more prone to giving children's advice on child rearing are the ones that never had children to rear. And he was giving advice to young parents, and he gave an illustration here out of the Bible about Eli, who didn't have the courage to chastise his children. He had a son. Now, under the tabernacle arrangement, only the high priest was allowed to go into the most holy in the presence of the Ark of the Covenant. And if anybody, and that was only one time a year during the Day of Atonement. If anybody went into the holiest of holies, who wasn't qualified or it wasn't in a proper manner, were stricken dead immediately. And this is what happened to this son. And he was using this as a lesson for parents to be stern, to be strict, and not to relent. That even though your children may not appreciate it now, what you're doing is for their benefit, and they'll appreciate it at a later part of their life. Now, I think this is a very cruel attitude, and again, like I said, I remember from my own experience the teachings and the consultation that for example, when we were reaching sexual maturity, masturbation was a sin, a willful sin, and therefore anytime you did it, God was watching you and you were sinning, so you were hiding it. You were hiding something in your heart, and you felt guilty and shame over something that was a normal bodily occurrence. I mean, it's a primal drive you cannot control, and if you repress it, you can create very, very dire psychological consequences. It's just a normal part of being human, and they use these cruelties to form and to impose conformance to the group and to acceptance to the group's behavior. And so I see I've been going on for quite a bit on this in this particular video, but I think I got some of the concepts through. And so if you wonder why Jehovah's Witnesses are so cruel and why they can have such a dispassionate attitude towards their members, especially the elders, you can understand that this is something that has been a part of the movement's culture all the way back, well into the 19th century, when it formed. And so, this isn't anything new to Jehovah's Witnesses. This is something that started, and when the two groups separated and Jehovah's Witnesses went one way and the Bible students another, they didn't change their culture tremendously. Although the autocratic rule of the Watchtower, especially under a cruel man like Rutherford, I would imagine that it was even more of a rigid culture than even in the Bible students. But for the most part, I think that the two cults, as they are, and I think they both qualify for cults. If you looked at what they call the bite model, the separateness from the world, its unique language, terminology that you have to learn, the isolationism from the world, the reading only exclusively literature from one source in order to avoid any dissent from within the ranks, at least from a conceptual point of view. These are things and individuals that are idolized and revered. In the case of Jehovah's Witnesses, you have a strong autocratic leadership under the governing body. With the Bible students, it's the reverence that is still shown today to Charles Taze Russell. Many talks quote from early reprints before pre-1916 and earlier reprints from Russell. They quote them as frequently, in some cases, as quotes from the Bible itself. So there are many aspects of both sects that are very similar. Many individuals today within the Bible students have come out of the Jehovah's Witnesses over the last 30, 40 years and joined the Bible students. And they find the Bible students similar enough to make them feel comfortable to the culture they're used to. And I think that's important in retaining individuals, that they feel comfortable. So the Bible students movement is something that they feel used to, that it's a culture that's similar to what they experienced as Jehovah's Witnesses. So anyway, I better cut it shorter. My videos tend to go on a little bit, but anyway, if you take it in segments and the time periods between making these videos, they're probably only average 5 minutes long. So think of it that way. I don't issue a lot of videos, so anyway, at least right now. So I wish you all well.